And then what happens? His house, so my mother had sold a house back in 2010, moved everything that wasn't into Dubai. His own house was there until 2018. When he sells it, it is his own house, so she was not allowed in, nobody was allowed in. And I think he just literally threw onto the streets and asked for a charity thing to pick it up, every single bloody thing that was in that house. Back then I had managed to save a lot of toys, but we could not pick up more furniture. So the only thing that stays in a family member, at least from that generation, from the generation of my father onwards, afterwards his generation, from his children, the only thing that has been kept are two pipes, a coat, the old days from the 1950s, and that thing which is very old, which I have in the back, that 1840s furniture. Now that is regards the belonging. So my brother, he has nothing. Like Nietzsche, nothing. Nothing. He has nothing from his childhood. He wanted nothing. I insisted many times. He wanted no pictures, nothing. So he has nothing from prior his 20s. Or even he regularly gives it all away. He had told me the last time I saw him when he was 25 or 6. So he probably never has anything that is more than 5 years old max. No toys, nothing. I saved all of that. I have all the toys and things in the back. I saved a lot of things from the family. Clothing, his clothing when he was a kid and everything. So, more than that, he has nothing. And now in terms of class, I was talking about the class, how the classes are mixed. And my brother was brought up with me, that brother. 10 parents, we were living together until he was 19. So for 19 years of my life and his life, no, that does not make sense, because I was younger, but for 19 years of, no, well, whatever. So anyhow, then he met a British woman in Dubai that comes from probably, I only met her once, but probably by her accent, her attitude, I guess she comes probably even just one generation that she really moved to. Probably until the 1970s, her family, unlike ours, was working class. Part of those working class that elevated themselves in the 70s to 80s, and so they were like low middle class, really until she probably, because she first married a Lebanese man that had a lot of money, like not huge, but maybe like a bit more like us, and so she had children with him, and then she met my brother when he was very young, when he was 19, which then he moved away out of the home. So that is how a middle class fella, or a working class person, absorbs middle class. In other words, she takes a middle class person, or a middle class person takes a working class person, or at least an upper middle class person takes a lower working class, an ex-lower middle class person. You could express it like that, or you could express it vice versa, that a lower middle class person takes an upper middle class person, and they complement each other. In other words, she upgrades herself, but he lowers himself. And that is truth, even in his mentality. By that time he started being less educated, reading way less. But she probably, in her teenage years, was not as educated as she was when she met him in her 30s, and probably gained more education and so on and so forth. So it meets. Very rarely, like in the Rothschild case I was talking about, is it one working class person marrying a multimillionaire and doing everything like him, and it goes shoo. And also rarely is it a super millionaire that ends up a tramp. But often it goes like that. They both meet each other like that. So they both adopt ways from one another. Especially in the middle class like me. A few of them sort of stay more like me, as in they really stay like you could have planned that, like, oh, he was born in very high upper middle class, so even now he has way less money, he's still in the same mentality structure thing, whereby he still speaks very well, and he reads, and he educates himself, and he tries to keep all the furniture and stuff. And I'm not going to have children, so all of that would be non-passed. I might have to give it to a museum if only they could care. So also often the people that stay in a class, they do not change their class in the least. They are the ones that also have children for some reason. And so although they conserved it all, the day they die it is done. The day they die, other people come in, take this, that, it goes to one person in Africa, to another one in France, to another one in Britain, and everything is passed away and not together as it now is. And also, that is how it happened. That is how things are not kept in the family, are not conserved, and our tracks are being completely lost within the family. And surely if somebody met my brother today, he would not think, except for to some degree the physical structure of the face, he would not think for a second that he is my brother, because he probably speaks English in a completely different mode. He lives, I don't know where, in Canada. He does not have the same concepts of life at all. He's not moral like me. Yeah, I wanted to explain. So it goes from an upper middle class like him, I mean our father, very high upper middle class. What is it now? The latest news I had, my mother's in contact with him. She told me he became a real estate agent. So his own father he did not stay like his father or go high. He suddenly went really down in real estate agent. So that is how class fluctuates between the middle classes. The best example is the middle class. Since I'm middle class, I know these examples all around me, because middle class people, without even realizing it, I started realizing that 5 years ago, we stay within middle class persons without even realizing. We go to middle class shops, not upper class shops or not working class shops. I started changing that because of money issues, and I suddenly thought it was stupid buying that thing in Speenie's when it is much cheaper in Viva and better quality. Until recently, I would not even have known about Viva, although it is next door to Speenie's. I would simply have gone to Speenie's, which is the typical middle class Western thing you would do in Dubai, which is a British middle class shop. And so they go to a middle class, like where I live is a typical middle class place in Dubai. So all my neighbors are middle class. Then you mix with your neighbors, they are middle class. They think like you, they dress like you, but not like me. But so that is how the middle class fluctuates, and that is how class fluctuates. But the middle class fluctuates more. They fluctuate between all the classes, up and working, but especially, usually they fluctuate only between the middle class, but between the lower middle class, medium middle class, and upper middle class. And in all of these sub-categories, like you have low, or you have high-low middle class, or you have low upper middle, or you have high upper middle, like I was brought up in a high upper middle, almost low upper class, in terms of wealth and everything. And so that explains for the garments. That explains it all. And so that is all to explain that back to 1900, the upper middle class would keep their formal stuff only for sentimental values. By 1950, they would still be kept within the family, or at least within the family. By the 1920s, when it changes in Britain, by 1960, most people were not working in class at all. They were like 30% of working class. During the 1960s, the working class was annihilated. Does it mean that, like with the Holocaust, they took working class people and put them in ovens? Not at all. It means a good thing that the working class upgraded to middle class. Most of them changed their whole lifetime to suddenly no longer work in factories they had used to, because the factories became completely automatized, and they began to become a low middle class. Or in other words, what I was talking about my brother's girlfriend, now wife, she probably comes from that. They suddenly took jobs, like cheap jobs, but that would not work with their hands, like accountants and all. And eventually, that was how it was made. So by 1970, 1980, there was probably only 15 to 10% of working class in Britain, whereby 90 years prior, or not even 80 years prior, it was 85%. So those middle class people, middle class families, like with me, but before, it always happened, or Kirby really matters, or obviously it would happen before. A lot of them, some of them would go up, but most of them would sort of go down a bit and mix with ex-high working class, now new low middle class, and the upper middle class would sort of mix with low middle class or medium middle class, and thus, suddenly the code of 1890, imagine, I am Richard in 1890, I am upper middle class, I am, let us transpose that example of me, the real life example, back in the day. Let us say I was born in instead of being born in 1996, let one suppose that I had been born in 1996. So my father would have been born in 1845 instead of 1945.